Hey there, it's Jason Padolan back with a special Up My Hockey episode. I've never done an episode where it's just me, so if you are if you are sick of hearing my voice, and if it is something that you don't need any more of me, then this is where you should probably just sign off and wait for my next guest. But I felt, along with this lady that I'm working with, named Wendy, who is it's interesting because Wendy's origin story with me and Up My Hockey came as starting from a hockey mom. So she was a hockey mom, and her husband, both not necessarily hockey parents, but they have this hockey crazed, starved, passionate boy who was just loving it, right, and wanted to be a player, and was good enough to make the good teams and the big teams, and were, he was looking for anything kind of to try and get better. And the podcast was how Wendy was introduced to me. And I'm not sure how she found it, whether it was suggested to her or it came up in her feed or whatever the case may be, but she started listening. And she started listening on the way to games and or practices with her son. And the podcast served as a vehicle for them to have conversations, about whatever the guest may have been talking about, the different circumstances that arise in players' careers, maybe some of the ideas that are shared or talked about, and her and her son were able to not only have conversations, but she was able to learn about the sport. Her son was able to learn from the perspectives of others, and we're also able to learn from me and some of the suggestions that I give on the program. So she was introduced to me that way, and then Devin, her son, ended up becoming one of my clients. He ended up taking the Peak Potential project, which was very successful for him. And I've been working with him essentially for about a year and a half now in my group coaching platform. And he's, first of all, I love talking about Devin. I haven't used his last name. I don't know if he would want me to or not. But anyways, has really taken off. He's played his first AJHL game. That's Junior A in Western Canada. He got his first point. He's just been committed to by a team in the AJHL. And I first started working with him at the U16 level. So I was a first year, actually, no, maybe even U15 now. Geez, I'm getting it confused. But anyways, I have definitely been a part of his journey along the way, and watching him evolve and progress as a player, and find his identity and use his skill set and own it and be unapologetic for it, and develop the practice habits and the personal development strategies away from the rink that will help him continue to get better and make an impact on his coaches, and all the fun stuff that I love working with players on. Devin has been a crazy ideal client. And why that's relevant is because Wendy is into brand management and brand development and business growth. That's what she does. So then I ended up meeting her and thought that she would be the perfect person to work with, because she was part of the origin story of a client, of what an Up My Hockey client looks like. And she thought that the podcast was an absolutely awesome platform. It allows people to get to know me. It allows people to get to understand my philosophy, introduce obviously great entertainment with great guests, but it really is a precursor to allow people to understand what I'm about, what Up My Hockey is, and whether their player or their team would be a good fit for some of the programs that I offer. So in saying that, she said, you need to really focus on this podcast. You need to really rock and roll with this delivery system, this outreach, because you get to reach more people. She thinks that I'm good at it, and it's nice to hear that at some points, that I'm a solopreneur. I work by myself. I'm in my office all day, and so for someone to tell you where you think you shine, it's always nice to hear and to push you in the right direction. And so she wanted me to really double down on the podcast, meaning make sure I get one done a week, make sure that I'm really diligent with it, and that I'm using content from the podcast to share some of the thoughts that I have about mindset and strategies, and to use that for posts and so on and so forth. But she also wanted me to do a 100th episode review, that this was a big milestone that she wanted me to celebrate. And I'm glad that she did, because one, this is why I'm doing this right now. She wanted, there were some different ideas of what we should do for the 100th episode, and whether I should find clips from my favorite interviews or how that would all work. And we ended up thinking, just from a sake of time, because these things are hard to produce and they're hard to cut together, but just for me to go back and review and look at them in 10 segment chunks, and to maybe talk about some of the guests and some of the episodes that really meant something to me and would maybe be good for some of the listeners that are just joining now to go back and check out. So Wendy has suggested that I do this, and I do think it's a great idea, because her allowing me the space to understand that maybe there is some importance to this also allowed me to really reflect, and I think that's important. I don't know who's listening. I don't know what your personal life is like or what you're up to, but I'm sure you're busy. I'm sure you don't have much free time or spare time, and I know for me as a solopreneur, and with almost, I mean, it seems like I have 5-6 different entities, businesses sort of running at the same time, and 3 kids in hockey and a wife that works. There is just, I go to bed at night a lot of times at 10:30 after I get up from my desk, and go down and lie in bed, and then I get up and do the whole thing again the next day. And so there doesn't seem to be much time to reflect, is what I'm saying. I'm very grateful for where I'm at. I love the position that Up My Hockey is at, and its growth dynamics and metrics, and you guys have a lot to do with that, and I'm grateful for you. So I'm grateful for the work and the hours that I'm putting in, is what I'm saying. But there often isn't time to just actually think and be like, holy smokes, 100 episodes. Like 100 episodes. That's nuts. For somebody who didn't want to do it in the first place. I really came into this not kicking and screaming, but there was big resistance. And I don't know if you follow where I am on social media or part of my email list, but I did write an email the other day and had a post just sort of about the genesis of the podcast. And it was from somebody who I'm still working with today. His name's Josh. And Josh suggested that I start this thing. He's like, you should do a podcast. He's a younger guy, much younger than me. I'm not sure how old he is. I think maybe late 20s now. He'll probably laugh at me that I don't know that age is such a non-factor for me, but definitely younger than me, and more in the in the age group or in the generation of technology touched, like his in his entire life, and was more into what was happening. And he's like, yeah, podcasts are the thing. And in 2019, it wasn't like podcasts were a secret, but they were still sort of like new to me. And why would I do one? And how would I even structure it? And what would I be talking about? And there was a lot of resistance with the idea. There was a lot of, once I got into it a little bit more, there was a lot of doubt for me on a personal level, from an egotistical level, right? Like my ego was getting threatened, for me to put myself out there like that. And this is, I know this would probably be like super foreign for many of you, to put yourself in front of a camera and just talk to a camera or talk to a microphone and share your thoughts without any editing, without, I don't know, with no direction, right? Like there's a vulnerability there, right, for sure, that I needed to overcome. I needed to not care about the judgment that potentially awaited. I needed to not care about what people were going to think about my idea. I had to not care about whether it was going to suck or not. And all these things were pointing to me like, being worried about my ego. And then I had the aha moment that I was like, oh my gosh, like the fear of making a mistake or the fear of judgment or all these things, me not doing it would recognize that I'm, essentially playing small. The irony was that it's exactly the things that I help athletes overcome, right? I help athletes be big and bold, and I help athletes rewrite the narrative of what a mistake means. And I help athletes step into their own personal greatness, right? And try and explore where their potential lies. And when I had that realization, 3 years ago now, almost 3 years and some ago, I was like, gosh, I have to do this. I'd kind of be an imposter if I didn't. I can't step away from something that is triggering some resistance in me, is triggering potentially some limiting beliefs, when this is exactly what I do to help athletes be their best. So that for me was the kick in the pants that I needed to at least try to go out there and give it a whirl. And as truth be told, now at this stage in the game, 100 episodes later, I'm super grateful that I did. I'm super grateful for Josh for suggesting it. I'm super grateful for having the courage to lean into it and to explore this unknown territory, because as much as it has done things for other people, for you guys who are listening, I get the messages, I get the texts, I get the thanks that what the podcast has supplied to people. And for me, that's super rewarding, was exactly why I wanted to do it. But the crazy part is like there's been massive benefits just for me as a human, for me in my personal growth, for me to have the conversations that my soul needs to have. I've mentioned already that I'm a solopreneur. I spend most of my time in an office by myself. I'm not out in an office environment or a social environment where I'm really talking to people a lot. And by nature, I'm an introvert. I'm somebody that likes, one-on-one conversations, not big groups, and I don't like too many conversations, or it's, it kind of freaks me out a little bit. So I'm not naturally attuned to going out and seeking social interaction. So this podcast has forced me kind of to get out of my own way in that situation and have these conversations that actually really nourish me. There's not a podcast that goes by, there hasn't been one episode that I've left feeling like, oh, I wish I didn't do that today. Like every one of them fills me up in a certain way, whether it be the lessons or the journey or just the connection with another human, whether it be on Zoom or not. These connections and these touch points really matter. So I am grateful to the podcast. I am grateful to the 100 episodes and like the days essentially that I've been on a mic now. It seems so crazy to me when I think about the actual combined time that I've been doing this. But for the most part, it's been absolutely fantastic. Like I said, the conversations are great. There are, like anything else, there are some pains in the ass with this. Finding somebody to edit or trying to edit it myself, or to cutting the clips, and what are the clips and what are the posts and how to post and all that social media stuff and the emails. Is hard. Sometimes you have to chase an odd guest here and there, and the scheduling isn't easy, and technology issues and all the stuff that goes along with it, not to mention the costs. There's a lot of things that happen with the podcast to make them work that aren't necessarily fun. But for me, the value of the conversation on an intrinsic level is absolutely amazing. And then also there's the extrinsic rewards for me of, like I said, of definitely being able to help other people and being able to share the stories of others, which is really inspiring for a lot of you, and also inspiring for me. So that's my prologue here into what will be happening. I'm going to say if in this point, because I really do want to commit to this, but one episode a week is like really, really difficult. And to get behind a mic now for me for a second episode for the next 10 weeks is going to be potentially trying. But that is the plan. The plan is to do a second episode every week, similar to what you're listening to now, where I'm going to get into a 10 episode segment. And I'm just going to go through the guests. I'm going to relive some of the guests. Maybe highlight some of the conversations that I am most grateful for, or have the fondest memories of, and maybe just to guide some attention for those of you who haven't listened to all 100. And I still have yet to have somebody email and say, hey, I have listened to all 100. One of my private clients' father, just in a Facebook group on Facebook, if you are there. It's called My Hockey Parent Group. It's a free group. It's an awesome community. He made a comment in one of my 100 episode posts, and he said, I think I've listened to about 90. So right now that's the highest that I've heard of somebody listening to all of them. But I'd love to hear if anyone has listened to all of them, and for me to go back and review them. This is going to be fun too. So that's the plan. 10 weeks, one bonus episode a week. You're just going to hear me, and we're going to chat about what the podcast has meant and what the guests have meant, and break them down into 10 segment chunks. So here we go. First episode, it says, I'm reviewing, I post this podcast on a platform called Buzzsprout. So if there's any budding podcasters out there, there's lots of ways to distribute your podcast. There's lots of, there's different companies out there that do it. I got in with Buzzsprout. I really don't know how to compare them to anyone else, but they definitely do the job for me. And that's where I upload the podcast to, the audio version at least. And then you have to sign up in the databases of all the different places, whether it be, Sirius XM or Amazon Music or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and they distribute the podcast to all these different entities. So I'm open in Buzzsprout right now, and it says December 1st, 2019 was episode 1. So holy smokes. Like I said, 2023 now as we record this. So 100 episodes ago, pre-COVID, pre-everything. And my first guest was Kevin Peterson. And thank you to Kevin. It's funny, too, because that is still the most listened to podcast, which actually surprises me. I mean, what that tells me is that when people find a podcast, the majority of them will listen to the first episode before they listen to the most recent episode. For me, I would always listen to the most recent episode, but it seems like most people listen to the Genesis episode, and Kevin Peterson was that. Kevin Peterson is a Western scout for the Arizona Coyotes. He still is working with Arizona. He had just started with them at the time, and he had come from a BC hockey, British Columbia hockey background, where he was working with the BRIC program, which is a program that tries to collect the best. What is it? I think it's first year Adams. So, U11, that would be 9-year-olds, maybe 10-year-olds in BC to go play in some of these big tournaments, like the Alberta Brick Tournament and some of these other big travel tournaments across North America in the summer. And I thought that he'd be a great guest because he'd seen high performance at a young level. He'd been involved in it. He also scouts National Hockey League amateur players, and it was awesome. I mean, we sat. It was actually an in-person interview. We sat in my office here. I don't know if I have that original footage posted anywhere, but I'm sure the audio sounds terrible. We didn't really know what I was doing, but the conversation was excellent. And so he was number 1, Kevin Sawyer number 2. Kevin Sawyer is now a TSN analyst, and was even at the time. And he was a tough guy with my team in Spokane. My team, I guess our team. He was the captain of it at one point, so it was more his team than my team with the Spokane Chiefs. But his story about becoming a pro is absolutely amazing. Like what he went through, the doubt, like the closed doors, the not making teams, all the rest of it, to end up playing in the NHL, the greatest game on the greatest league in the world. That was a really fun episode with Kevin. I also had Daniel Briere, and I'm going to get back to Daniel, but we had Brad Larson, who was my first, he was an assistant coach at the time in the NHL for episode 4. He is now the head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets. What an honor to have Brad on. He was a Vernon Minor hockey product with me. We won a World Junior Championship together for Team Canada, which, how crazy is that? I don't even know. I'm sure we talked about that, but Vernon has 40,000 people maybe now. Back then, maybe 30. And of all the hockey players in Canada, of all the towns in Canada, of all the cities in Canada, Vernon, British Columbia, produced 2 players that played for the national junior team that won gold. I thought that was pretty special and pretty crazy. And obviously Brad went on to an NHL career, and to have him as an NHL assistant coach at the time was fantastic. And Brad is a great interview. He is probably in this group. Well, anytime I talk to Brad, he's such a great guy to talk to, and that conversation is really good. If you haven't listened to that first episode with Brad, you definitely should. Trevor Letowski was episode 5, head coach of the Windsor Spitfires. He has now moved on to be the assistant coach of the Montreal Canadiens, another NHL team and representative. How cool is that just even to watch? That was February 2nd, 2020. So 3 years later, he's up with Martin St. Louis as the head coach in Montreal. Trevor, an amazing hockey mind himself, and was super gracious to come on. David Nemirovsky, head coach of a KHL team, former teammate of mine in Florida, was episode 6. Andy Delmore, an ex-teammate, and now is still coaching too over in the OHL. Dusty Emu is an NHL goalie coach, Jack Campbell's goalie coach back in the day, to drop a name there amongst others. And then Tom Laidlaw and Tom Cowell rounded out my first 10. Tom Cowell, a 20-year NHL referee. That is a really off-the-radar episode. I think referees in general, I think that they're just kind of if you're not talking about them, I guess they've done a good job. And usually when you're talking about them, you're complaining about something. Very rarely have I heard a conversation about parents or players or pundits for that matter, who will be like, what a great job by the referees tonight. It's just a very underappreciated aspect of the sport that is super necessary, especially at the minor hockey league level. And in that conversation with Tom Cowell, we talk about the issues of refereeing and how they're having a hard time attracting young refs. And like, go figure, right? Like, newsflash, it's not fun for these refs. Like, we have 12-year-old refs reffing 10-year-old games, and all they're doing is getting yelled at from the coaches and from the parents. And I hear people banging on the glass, and it's not a fun spot. And we got to treat our referees better. We also need to train them and develop them and all the rest of it, but we need to allow it to be a safe place for these kids to learn. And that was a really, really good conversation with Tom Cowell there, and how there's a massive shortage of referees. And I just reflect on some of the conversations we're having now, like even with like the hockey players of today's generation. Like, it's harder for them to deal with adversity. It's harder for them to be told no. I think it's a social thing. I think it's a social structure thing, like the way their schools are programmed, the way society is programmed, like so accepting of participation medals and awards, and we don't give grades anymore, and all this kind of stuff. And so when adversity happens, I think it's harder for our athletes to move forward. Now, if you pass that baton on to now a young referee who is one of 3 on the ice, and now they're having to get put up against, parents, adults yelling, screaming, coaches telling them that they're wrong. Like, who in the heck wanted to do that 30 years ago? Now, who in the heck wants to do it today? Like, there's less and less. So we have to create a safer space for these referees. But anyways, I digress, because that was episode 10, and it really was a good one if you want to listen. But I'm going to focus in on Danny Briere as far as my all-star pick here in the first 10. He was episode 3. Danny Briere was an NHL star, an absolute NHL star. Why I like his episode so much is because it's really still to this day one of the ones that really speaks to me about the value of mindset and the value of mental training. And Danny talks not super in detail in this interview about the things that he did working with a sports psychologist that allowed him to become the NHL player that he ended up being. And he will be the first one to raise his hand and say, I would never have become that player without that introduction and without those tools and strategies from that sports psychologist. And he even outlines like the story about how he got involved with it, like on a suggestion from somebody in Phoenix to go speak with this guy, and how he was resistant to doing it, and how he was super resistant after the meeting, right? That thought this guy didn't know what he was talking about, but then leaned in. Similar to my story about the podcast, right? Like, there was resistance there. I'm not ready for this. I don't want to do it. What is he talking about? Like all these limiting beliefs and questioning thoughts, but then ended up leaning in, and the world really opened for Danny. And he started using some of these mindset tools and some of these strategies and some of these rewiring some belief systems and getting his preparation just dialed in, and all these areas that aren't generally considered by athletes. And it made him the athlete that he was. It made him the NHL player that he was, that went on to be one of these smaller players that performed best in the biggest moments, was always a playoff performer, super gritty, was able to get it done when the lights were the brightest, and had a very, very long and very, very lucrative and very, very successful career. And this was from a guy who was having a hard time breaking through at the time, right? He was a late first-round pick. He was a smaller, undersized guy. He was a French-Canadian who didn't speak English very well. And he was having a hard time figuring out how the NHL game and where he fit in with that. And he was doing well in the minors, and then he would come up to the NHL, and then he would get sent down. And he was doing well in the minors, and he just couldn't find his way. And it was the sports psychologist and his work with that sports psychologist off the ice that allowed him to really step into his potential. Danny Briere is now, I think, the special assistant to the GM, Chuck Fletcher in Philadelphia. He's working his way up the ranks. We still remain in contact today, and we've actually had some pretty serious discussions about how potentially Up My Hockey could fit at some point, maybe with the Philadelphia Flyers or with their minor league team. Danny is a very big believer in that support for the players and offering that support, and is also a fan of having somebody who's played the game like myself, who is not a sports psychologist, who is that liaison for players. Because Danny knows just as much as I do. He's like, that was hard for me, with the sports psychologist. There's just a different feeling about stepping in and talking with somebody like that, and being able to work with somebody that uses similar type language and similar type strategies, but has actually played the game, is a little bit easier connection, to start working and start opening their eyes to some of these things and some of these concepts. So that would be my all-star pick from the first 10. And what a great lineup that was. I was so lucky to have these players and ex-players and colleagues that were able to come on and share their thoughts with me. And that was January 10th, 2020. Danny Briere was released, an hour and 19 minutes. So if you have not listened to that episode, I strongly suggest you do. Really hard for me to say what is best and what isn't, obviously, because each guest speaks to each listener in their own way. I have no idea what's going on in your journey or in the journey of your player. If you're a player, where you're at with what it is you're trying to accomplish and what it is you need to hear. But the great part is about exposing yourself to these different people and their different backgrounds and their different positions and all the things that they're doing, is that you never know what gem you're going to get. You never know what message you're going to hear and when the right time is to hear it. So one of the great things about Up My Hockey is that these aren't of the moment type discussions. So they are definitely worth the opportunity to go revisit. They are worth, you can go back and listen to Danny Briere, and it's going to be as relevant today as it was back in January 10th, 2020. So that's definitely the case with Up My Hockey. No episode dates itself. They're all there for you if you want. And 26 minutes in now. That is definitely long enough for this first segment. If you've stuck with me this long, and if you want to reach out on social, by all means, let me know what your favorite episode was out of your top 10. And if you've heard any of them, and if you haven't heard any of them, and you take me up on my offer for listening to Danny Briere, let me know what you think. Until next time, play hard and keep your head up.